Hi, welcome to my video blog. This is Moses Gumadi, and in this episode I want to talk about operational excellence. What is operational excellence? What is operations, first of all? Let's look at the scope of operations to begin with. Okay. Now, it's just not the make or the serve part of the business that is the operations, but also the other elements such as buy, deliver, get paid and pay, which is accounts payable, accounts receivable, and product development and or offering development, and customer acquisition. These processes actually become a part of the operations, and especially so for some businesses. And of course, the supporting processes that help all of these. Okay, these all together constitute operations. And operations are usually subject to or subjected to external variables such as demand, changing demand, for example, regulation that comes in, changes, etc. once in a while, and market forces and risk factors. All of these determine how the operations function, and operations obviously have to bring about outcomes, and those outcomes are good outcomes, positive outcomes for the customers, shareholders and employees, and also negative outcomes. But we don't want the negative outcomes. Operations can produce negative outcomes sometimes in the areas of safety, compliance and environment, and so those need to be ensured that they won't occur, right? So we don't want those negative outcomes. But this is what operations is. Operations produces positive outcomes, sometimes ends up producing negative outcomes, and is usually subject to external variables, and that constitutes all these different process areas or operational areas as we have outlined here on this slide. Let's take a different cut of the operations. You could actually consider any business and say you can find the elements of operations in these four, namely the process flows / activity networks, secondly the human resources that carry out these processes, right? Finally the assets that you use. It could be software assets or hardware assets and facilities that are used to carry out these activities and processes, and finally of course the material flows that move from one end to the other across the process, and also the informational flows and the informational setups that you have in order to process and control the overall system. Okay, these constitute the elements of the operations. Now let's consider this particular box of the positive outcomes for the customers, shareholders and employees. Now, what is that positive outcome? It is essentially creation of value. So operations create value. Value for the customer, value for the shareholder, and value for the employee. And these operations obviously directly create that value. But remember, shareholder value especially, while it is directly created from the operations itself, is also dependent upon how much customer value and how much employee value is generated, and that determines the shareholder value as well. And this is a very key thing. Otherwise, focusing simply on a short term on the shareholder value without delivering customer value, without delivering employee value, can reduce greatly the shareholder value in the coming years, in the longer term. Okay, that's the danger. So this is a very important relationship as far as the positive outcomes are concerned for these three stakeholder groups. Now, considering the customer value. So customer value, what does it really mean? What do the customers really value? So they value better quality products with good functionality, etc., whether it be a product or a service. They desire a particular variety of a range of products that they can choose from, or the different configurations or different colors and different features, etc. They also want dependable and timely service. Right, timely service, of course, but also if they keep on ordering, they want that consistency, and that's the dependability part there. And of course, they want it at a competitive price. Now, how can we deliver that? How can operations deliver that? It's only possible by actually having operational capability within your organizations. Operations must have the capability internally via its processes, people, technology and hardware and software assets, etc. we talked about, and of course the material and information flows. How are all these things selected, organized and connected and managed? That will depend what kind of capabilities emerge out of it, and we need to have these capabilities such as ability to produce quality products and outcome products and services, flexibility within the operations to be able to deliver that desired variety, and the speed of operations and consistency of operations to actually ensure the dependable and timely service for the customers, and finally of course managing the costs within the operations to be able to provide the goods at a competitive price. Now, all of these capabilities cannot be built together because some of the requirements are contradictory. And so companies might choose a strategy called an operations strategy. How do we play in this market by configuring our operations, and what do we play with our strengths? For example, company A may have designed their operations and have come up with a strength, capability of being able to deliver high quality products at a very high speed and consistent manner, whereas of course they're not so great on flexibility and not so great on the cost or the price either, whereas a company B may choose a slightly different strategy. And the reason why companies choose different operation strategies is because obviously those four capabilities have contradictory requirements, and meeting all of them together is a big challenge operationally. Okay, so we're still talking about operational excellence, remember. So operationally there are constraints, and so companies come up with these different operational strategies. It's pretty much like Usain Bolt and Mo Farah. Both of them are fantastic sportsmen, but they have their different areas. If you see the build of the body, the sort of diet or exercise regimen, there may be commonalities, but there are also differences between them because they play to different crowd, they play in a different area, they play on a different turf because the game is different. Okay, so that's the way you need to choose an operational strategy. First of all, how do you want to play your game? Okay, coming back to the shareholder value, right? We were talking about the outcomes, the positive outcomes the operations need to generate, and we talked about customer value. Now we'll talk about the shareholder value. So shareholder value essentially mathematically depends upon the return on the invested capital of your business, which can be connected to the operations, and also the revenue growth. So these two numbers, return on invested capital and revenue growth, determine the long-term shareholder value that the operations can deliver. Now the return on the invested capital can be connected to your operational parameters using a ROIC tree, as I have illustrated here. Now come back to the question, the original question, right? So what is operational excellence? Let's take this map now, start answering these questions. So first of all, we want to increase the positive outcomes. Operational excellence is a setup, is a framework, or is a set of activities or a mindset, and all of these things where the focus is put on improving, increasing the positive outcomes, and of course reducing and completely eliminating, if possible, these negative outcomes that I have outlined. By how? By actually coming up with a base operating model, an optimal base operating model. And I'll tell you why am I calling that a base operating model. Operating model essentially has all these four different things we talked about, the processes and the people and the and the hardware, software, assets and locations, etc., plus the material and information flows. Those elements, the building blocks, how are they connected and arranged is essentially an operating model. And that model properly designed, your operational system properly designed, can actually deliver fantastic outcomes, those positive outcomes for your customers, shareholders and employees, and can reduce and eliminate those negative outcomes which you do not want to see. Okay, but this base operating model needs to be constructed using some assumptions of demand, regulation, risk factors, and all those external variables we talked about at an assumed level of performance. However, now we need to that's not the only thing. And once you have this base operating model, you should be able to carry out the operations, which is execution of the operations in a perfect manner, which is flawless execution. So very optimized base operating model, designed using the assumed levels of the external variables to provide the best outcomes possible, right? Plus the flawless execution is actually operational excellence. There is another thing. Now, these assumed levels of the external variables we talked about do not stay constant, they vary. Okay, demand varies. Suddenly something else comes up, and market factors vary. Sometimes you may end up seeing certain risks which you might anticipate, but you need to change your track. Right? So these things vary, and when they vary, you need another element, and that element is essentially an ability to change and adapt your operating model to the new changing requirements coming externally. Okay, so you need to have readiness plan. For example, if the demand goes up 25% up or down, or if the resources become unavailable by 75%, or maybe 25% less resources available, or something else has happened in the market, which means our sales are down by 40%. How are you going to reorganize your operating model and run the operations? You need to have readiness plans. Plus, your operating model must be agile or flexible. That means you should be able to easily make those changes to the other operating mode, from one mode to the other. It should be agile, it should be flexible, and you should have a readiness plan. So you should know clearly, okay, if my demand goes down by 20%, I know what I'm going to do, A, B, and C, and your operating model should help you to, it should be flexible enough for you to actually make that particular change. All of these constitutes operational excellence. Operational excellence is about achieving the best possible positive outcomes, and reduce and nullify or eliminate the negative outcomes from the operations, whilst really flawlessly executing and having a fantastic operating model that is flexible, which can be flexed based on the external variables coming in. That's the crux of operational excellence. So it is a journey. So you can't achieve that like you define it tomorrow and then you have operational excellence obviously within a month or within an year. No, it's a journey. Could be achieved over a time, but it's a journey. So what are the steps to operational excellence? First of all, define what good looks like. Okay, define what good looks like. Second, baseline your current performance. When I said define what good looks like, we talked about the positive outcomes for the customers, shareholders, and employees. Find out what they are, and obviously find out what they are currently in your own operations. Thirdly, determine a set of key operational excellence initiatives, projects or initiatives that will bridge the gap over a time. Okay, find out what are those initiatives. They must be scientifically determined. You should know the benefits they deliver, right? And you should figure out the resources required and all the rest of it. Essentially, coming up with robust project plans. Not necessarily the duration, but the actual content of that change, that initiative, and whether or not it can make a difference to bridge the gap between number one and number two. Define what good looks like and where are you at the current moment. So that gap needs to be bridged. Okay, and with this set of initiatives, you prioritize them based on their return on invested capital. Plus, how early can you get the benefits, whether or not your resources are available, how much risk is there, and all these parameters. Use them to prioritize and set up a delivery roadmap. Okay, so that's the fourth step. And of course, finally, also, they're not sequential, especially as we go forward from here on. Some of these steps actually are parallel. So build resources, including human resources, and build capability within the organization to be able to define what good looks like, what is the baseline. That means you need to set up a measurement system. How do you identify the operational excellence initiatives, development of the plan, etc. All these capabilities are required to be built. execute the projects, execute the improvement initiatives, okay, measure the progress, and reward and recognize and all the rest of it. You need to have that closed loop thing going on, and finally have a continuous improvement going on within the organizations at the level where you want to sustain it, and keep on going. That's in crux is what I think to be operational excellence. Thank you for your attention. We'll see you in the next video.